Does your accent in European Portuguese still need some serious work? Do you find yourself struggling to put the ow and the sh in the right place? It can be so confusing to learn all of the different pronunciation rules for European Portuguese, but remembering which sounds to make when is going to help you blend in with the locals instead of sticking out like a sore thumb. So in today's video, I'm going to give you some really helpful cheat codes that I give to my students to help you remember which sounds to make based on what you see written down when reading Portuguese, because there are lots of clues, you just need to know what they mean. If you're new around here, my name is Liz and I help people who are relocating or retiring to Portugal to go from saying their very first words up to having their first full conversations with native speakers. And the very first thing that we work on in the Portuguese Pro program is pronunciation, because it is the foundation for everything that comes next in the language. You can download my free pronunciation guide linked in the description if you want to do a deep dive into how to make some of the hardest sounds. So cheat code number 1, you may be aware that Portuguese has what we call open and closed vowels. So what is the difference? So here's an example of an open A. Ah. Ah. And here is the closed A. So you can tell we've got two quite different sounds there, and the giveaway is what I'm doing with my mouth, right? When I'm doing an open A, it's an ah, my mouth is nice and open, and when I do a closed A, it's more closed. So how do I know which sound to make when, because they're both the letter A? Well, the most obvious time is when I have to stress an A because there is an accent on top of it, and that looks like this. So the clue when you see this written down is seeing that this accent almost looks like an open door. So if you think of that, you see this accent and you think, open door, open A. And that's going to remind you that you need to open the vowel that is under one of those accents. So as I said, the accent isn't only telling us whether that's an open or closed vowel, it's also telling us that the stress has to go on that letter. I sometimes think of it in that case as raising its hand, saying, hey, please stress me. And I do have a whole video on where to put the stress when we are speaking Portuguese, so you can check that one out next. I'll link it in the description. This doesn't just apply to A, this applies to E and O as well. So you can look out for these accents that go up like this, and that's going to tell us we want to make an open E, which would be an E, or an open O, which would be an O. So another little clue in the form of an accent. Have you ever seen an A or an E with what looks like a hat on the top? I want you to think about this as like a lid going on top of the E. So I don't want an open E, I want to close down the sound a little bit. It's still not going to be a closed E when we see the E with the hat, but it's not going to be open either. I refer to it as a middle E, and it sounds like this. E. E. It's the same E that we would have in mês or Portuguese. So now when you see that, you're going to remember that it's not going to be an open E, it's going to be a middle E because we're having to close down the sound. It's not going to be open. Another sound that people get really confused about in Portuguese is the letter S, because when you see an S, it could be a S, a sh, a z, or even a j sound. So when my students see a word like this, pessoas, they often mix up the position of the sh and end up saying pessoas, and that's not what we want. So in this case, what is going to help is when you see a double S, you need to remember that that is a s sound. So what I want you to think of is like the hissing of a snake. The sound that a snake is going to make is going to be s. So when you see more than one S together, that double S like we have in the middle of pessoas, I want you to s like a snake. The final sound I'm going to give you a cheat code for is for when words end in AM or EM. Do you know how these should sound? Just to remind you, if a word ends in an M, we don't want to hear a M sound. We're actually going to nasalize the vowel that comes before the M. So we don't say bom dia, We say bom dia. Bom. We make that really nice nasal O. But what about when we see a word like this? Moram. Moram. People really struggle with putting that nasal A at the end there. So what I want you to think of is instead of seeing an AM, you can imagine you are seeing this A with the tilde O. Now, hopefully you'll remember that the tilde on top of an A makes that a nasal A. So that ow sound is actually exactly the same as what we're going for at the end of the word moram. Moram. Now, the difference is that when we have the tilde on the A, ow, we're going to put the stress there. But in this word, there is no accent, so I have to follow the default rule for stress, which is putting it on the penultimate syllable, which in this case is mo. So we say moram. Moram. So that I need you to be really careful of, because usually people will see a nasal sound at the end of a word and get so stressed about making sure that they say it correctly that they end up putting the stress there. But just watch out, because it isn't the case if there's no accent there. Once again, this whole video about stress is going to help you with that if you want to learn more about how that works. So you can use a similar trick for words ending with EM. This time the sound that we are looking for is I. And that would be the same if we saw A with a tilde and an E, like in the word my. So here's how I want to pronounce a word ending in EM. Ficarem. Ficarem. As you can see, I'm pretty much making that same sound at the end, ein. So you can slot that one in there instead, and it's going to sound perfect. So now you have a few clever tricks to help you say the right sound at the right time in Portuguese. If you like this lesson, you would love my free lesson for beginners. We take a deep dive into pronunciation as well as essential grammar and my tips on how to understand fast spoken Portuguese. The link to register is in the description and I would love to see you there. It will also tell you exactly how to apply to work with me inside the Portuguese Pro program, where you can get conversational in a matter of months. And I know it works because I've seen my students do it. I'll link some of their testimonials below too, so you can take their word for it instead of mine. I'll be back next week with more tips and tutorials to get you confident and conversational in European Portuguese, so I look forward to seeing you then. Ciao for now.